The ATO expects that there'll be a history of engagement and communication with them about the issues before the appointment of a restructuring practitioner. This business restructure is designed to address systemic and historic issues of solvency. It's not to be used as a one-off get out of jail free card when it comes to paying your debts. Hi everyone, Liam Bailey here from O'Brien Palmer. Recently became aware of a website that tracks the statistics around small business restructures, and having a look at the data on that website got me thinking about how effective small business restructures have been and the reasons that sometimes small business restructures are not successful. Down here you might find a link to be able to have a look at that objective data about appointments, about successes. Now, a lot of that data is out of context. Quite often there are a number of complex reasons that small business restructures are not successful, and none of that's taken into account in a straight analysis of the results. But nonetheless, I thought it was very interesting anyway. Small business restructures have become an integral part of the insolvency profession, and I will also include a link down here to a lot of the previous materials that we've published about how small business restructures operate, why they are a viable part of a restructuring that a business might require, and things that directors to be aware of. Having had a look at the data as it pertains to my own appointments, I thought there was a common theme that had come through, or a couple of common themes about why businesses had not been successful in implementing those restructures. Having a look at the appointments that we have taken over the last 12 months, the most common theme is that business restructures fail because of a lack of support from the tax office. Now, the tax office is first and foremost the biggest creditor in every single insolvency administration in Australia. That will come as no surprise. What might come as a surprise to people is to find out that in close to 90% of small business restructures, it is either the sole creditor or it is such a large proportion of the company's liabilities that it can say yes or no under its own weight as to whether or not the small business restructure will succeed. That is to say, if you can convince the ATO in 90% of cases, your small business restructure will succeed. So why might the ATO say no? In a couple of cases recently, it's become very clear that the history of the company is really integral. We've had two cases where the ATO has said that in the lead up to the appointment of a small business restructuring practitioner, they had absolutely no contact with the director that would suggest that the director was interested in staying on top of their tax debts, had made any sort of genuine attempts to resolve their tax debts, or to speak to the tax office about their increasing liabilities. In fact, the first that the ATO was aware that there was any directors present looking at or aware of the company's tax liabilities was to receive notice of the appointment of the small business restructuring practitioner to the business. What does the ATO think in these circumstances? Well, it seems to be that they think that in those circumstances, people are going out of their way deliberately to incur debts, that they are funding their businesses off the back of not paying tax debts, and that the first opportunity has arisen, they've appointed a small business restructure on the basis that they believe that it will get waved through and they will have 80% of their debt wiped off or something to that effect. So there has to be a genuine history of people attempting to meet the liabilities that they've incurred. And the ATO expects that there'll be a history of engagement and communication with them about the issues before the appointment of a restructuring practitioner. This business restructure is designed to address systemic and historic issues of solvency. It's not to be used as a one-off get out of jail free card when it comes to paying your debts. Similarly, some of the other reasons that some have failed recently have had to do with the manner in which directors have maintained their accounts, as the ATO sees it, in an attempt to defeat income tax. So many directors will, on an annual basis, put their drawings out of the business into a loan account, and the small business restructure might actually end up resulting in that income being received in a manner that doesn't have it reported properly by the directors in their personal capacity, and therefore they avoid the payment of associated tax. The ATO has made clear that they will not consider where there's been a misuse of loan accounts to defeat income tax, or for any other reason, the accrual of directors' loan accounts in a manner that's inappropriate to be approved and covered up through the small business restructuring process. So what are the takeaways? First and foremost, speak to your accountant, speak to the tax office when you've got problems before they get too far ahead of you. Have a history of engagement so that the ATO can see that this really is a genuine structural problem or financial issue in the business and not an attempt to avoid paying tax. And otherwise, make sure that you're accounting for your income and your personal expenditure in a manner that shows that you've understood that you and your companies are independent entities and not intertwined. I've done to talk about one final issue that arose in a matter just recently. After having appointed us as the small business restructuring practitioners to the company, the directors, without speaking to us, engaged in the process where they ended up selling off the business and its assets and handing back the company's premises. Now, the legislation provides that as a debtor in possession model, you as the directors can stay in charge of the day-to-day operations of your business while a restructuring practitioner is appointed. But you cannot step outside that and engage in special transactions or out-of-character transactions without the consent of the small business practitioner. Such transactions are essentially void and constitute an offence, but they're also grounds for the termination of the small business restructure. In this case, the directors advised that they had intended, notwithstanding the sale of the business assets, to still enter into an arrangement to pay something meaningful to creditors to avoid the necessity of liquidating that company. But that transaction defeats the purpose of restructuring a business, which is to save it, and therefore is an abusive process and such one that a liquidator will effectively need to be appointed to that business. So engaging with the restructuring process in good faith to turn businesses around is an essential component of a successful restructure. That being said, you will be able to see from the data below that the ATO is still highly supportive of the small business restructure process for people who are engaging with it in good faith and in an appropriate manner. And we've had fantastic successes here at OBP in helping businesses restructure their affairs and obtain some debt relief. So please, don't hesitate to get in contact with us. We're happy to give you some of our time to have a look at your circumstances and see if the small business restructuring process is right for you and a viable way for you to turn around your business's flagging financial circumstances. Until next time, thanks for listening, guys. Have a great one.